in funding. Welcome news, one might have thought, but a statement issued by the former Minister for Finance, Honourable Mohammed Amin Adam, the MP for Karaga, giving some doubt to the reception by the minority side in Parliament to the news from the IMF. Joining us to discuss what the announcement about the staff level agreement actually suggests for Ghana. Is this a sign of approval and clearance for the new government to carry on with business as usual? Is it a judgment on the last government? Is the former Minister of Works and Housing and previously of Information and frontbencher for the minority caucus, the NPP side in Parliament, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, who joins us on Zoom now. And we say good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Mina. How are you?
I'm quite well. Nice to see you. I hope you're in good spirits too.
Very good spirits. Very good spirits.
And in good spirits, one hopes no less than this announcement by the IMF. It seems Ghana, unlike other African countries trying to recover from the COVID crisis and kickstart economies again, seems to have cleared many hurdles with very little problem. The announcement of the pending review by the executive board of the release of financing for Ghana, surely welcome news. So why the slight tone of rancour in the response in the statement issued by Mohammed Amin Adam?
Well, Dr. Adam issued the statement on behalf of the minority caucus as the ranking member on finance. And the statement essentially reiterates our earlier position and draws attention to the fact that what the fund has done is to affirm the position that the MPP administration, which is now the minority caucus, took. That contrary to the position of the NDC administration, which is now the government, contrary to their position that the economy had been badly mismanaged and that the economy was a crime scene, etc., the evidence now as validated by the International Monetary Fund is that Ghana is progressing on the key parameters that we agreed to work on as part of the economic program. You will recall that before the election, the then NDC team sought to create the impression that the government had mismanaged the economy. And when they won power, they sought to affirm this position by expressing some narratives that this economy had been criminally mismanaged, it was a crime scene, we had plundered the state, we left no buffers, etc. Now, as the experts are getting to work, the experts are contradicting those arguments, especially when the finance minister, Dr. Akufo-Addo, tried to, may I say, manufacture some data to support the NDC's narrative. So you recall that when he read the budget, he came up with what he called some 49 billion Ghana cedis worth of arrears, which he sought to use to adjust the primary fiscal balance into a deficit of about 3.9%. And in so doing, used that to justify the claim that we had badly mismanaged the economy. But that also meant that what he was saying was that we had failed on the IMF program targets. Now, the IMF has had the opportunity to look at the data, and the IMF is saying that contrary to these claims, number one, the real sector of the economy has performed way better than they had even thought, ending around 5.7% growth for the year 2024. Mm-hmm. Number two, the financial sector of the economy, which had been in trouble, requiring us to do a banking sector resolution program, which cost us a lot of money. The financial sector is now performing way better than had been programmed. And number three, the external sector, our export earnings vis-a-vis our import, bills, was a net positive, a significant net positive. And so on the first three parameters, we're doing way better than was expected. Number four, the fund also goes further to say that in terms of debt management, our debt burden, which was initially a challenge and one of the reasons for which we went into this fund program, our debt burden is now significantly reduced. It's now sitting around 61.8%. The target is to bring it to about 55% by the end of the year 2028. So that was also a very significant gain. Mm-hmm. They go on to mention, however, that the government has informed them of fiscal slippages for the year 2024. Now, what that means is that this new government is more or less reporting to the IMF that we have failed on the fiscal consolidation program. And the quantum of that failure is a deficit of 3.9% on the primary fiscal balance. Now, the fund is saying that even if they are to use this government's calculation or this government's formula, it doesn't amount to the numbers that they are talking about. The worst that they will even grant to be 3.25. So again, even when they are trying to throw Ghana under the bus, the fund makes the point that that is not the case. The fund goes further to say that, but that needs to be validated. Those numbers they are talking about needs to be audited some more. And then the fund concludes by making the point that Ghana is on track. And because of that, they are able to reach what they call a staff level agreement, agree between the staff of the fund and the staff of the BOG and MOF, that Ghana is on track, and therefore Ghana qualifies for the next disbursement of the $370 million. Now, it is this that the minority caucus is reiterating, that this is evidence that, contrary to the narrative and the speculation that the economy had not been managed well, this is the evidence that the economy is on the right track, has been managed well. Let me add to it also that the central bank, the new governor, ahead of the last MPC meeting, announced that they inherited good buffers. So again, contrary to the narrative that we plundered the state and left nothing in the buffers, their new governor himself is admitting that we left very, very strong buffers for this administration. So if we put the two together, that is what Dr. Amin says. It's a vindication of the recovery work that was done. What this government needs to do is to focus on building on it and not trying to undermine it for political gains.
Well, one can understand, Honourable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, the need for the minority caucus to want to change what it sees as a biased slant to the narrative that has emerged from repeated pronouncements through the Ministry of Finance under the leadership of Kassiel Forson, and indeed from President Mahama about the conduct or the quality of the economic management of Ghana under the Akufo-Addo governments. But it's not an unalloyed picture. I mean, just to return to the three key conditionalities on which you say Ghana performed far better than expected. Yes, there was a projection of 3.1% overall growth, which got revised up to 4%. And as you say, the economy exceeding that by 1.7 percentage points, achieving 5.7 in 2024. And you spoke about there's also the external sector and the gross reserves, which you mentioned the governor of the Bank of Ghana referring to there at $8.9 billion at the end of 2024. And the growth of the financial sector following the banking sector cleanup. So total assets at the end of 2024 were 33.8%, nearly 34. Total deposits growing by 28.8 to nearly 29%. Improvements also in the capital markets. But nonetheless, the International Monetary Fund pointing out in its statement announcing the staff level agreement that notwithstanding the higher than expected growth and further significant improvement in Ghana's external position last year, program performance deteriorated markedly at end 2024, and fiscal slippages in the run-up to the election led to a large accumulation of payables, and inflation crucially exceeded programme targets, and several reforms, policy reforms and practical reforms were delayed. Can you understand the caution on the part of the IMF and indeed of the current government in declaring the end-of-term report, as it were, for 2024 far from an unallied success? There have been announcements of billions of cedis worth of unpaid debts by the previous government that are sitting on the books, in effect constituting hidden debt.
That cannot be the case. And it cannot be the case because while the new government claims these billions of cedis of hidden debts, the new government itself says that they are not sure of the figure and that they need to do an audit to know. Now, it is worth mentioning that every time a new administration assumes office, you find all sorts of people coming from all over the place making claims that government owes them this or government owes them that. In fact, sometimes even contracts that have been signed but have not been delivered are added to the stock of commitments that these are commitments that are owed us. And so you'll find that the deficit on a commitment basis is racked up and a lot of claims are made. The onus is on the government to do a proper audit before you proceed to adjust your national accounts and in particular your primary fiscal balances. If you rush for political expediency to say, people say we owe them, so let's deduct what they claim we owe them from our fiscal balances, you will end up worsening and announcing a worse position to the investor community and the public. And that is exactly what this government is doing, which is causing it its own challenges. In 2017, and when we draw the attention to it, they say, but in 2017, you also announced that about 7 billion worth of commitments had been brought forward. That is true. But we did not proceed to adjust the national accounts and the primary fiscal balance by this 7 billion because we had not audited them. And we audited them, and when we had completed the audit, we found out that a good chunk of that was not due. Now, that is what this government has to do. And if you have not done that and you proceed, therefore, to announce to the fund that these are the commitments that we have received, and therefore we are proceeding to adjust the numbers. That's where the fund says, even if we follow you, it's 3.25, not even the 3.9 that you are talking about. But in any case, these are numbers that need to be adjusted. And so our point is this: don't be in a hurry to undermine the national economic data because you want to score political points. You cut your nose to spite your face, and you don't gain anything from it. In fact, the moment you started making those announcements, the cost of Ghanaian paper on the global market started going up because you were undermining confidence in the Ghanaian economy. In fact, a number of things that this government is doing is essentially undermining the confidence of investors because they want to score political points back home. And so for us, while we say we don't have a problem with you auditing the numbers, what we say to this new government is that don't rush in adjusting the national fiscal data just because you want to score what we call cheap political points. Accept the data, because in any case, apart from this one that you want to strongly, may I say, reduce, all of the other parameters show clearly that the Ghanaian economy is rebounding very strongly. What do you lose if you admit that and build on it? That's what the government should do.
Well, scoring political points, but the NPP side is not immune to this, and neither are you as the ranking member representing the minority on the Economy and Development Committees in Parliament. And one could say it is not just one indicator where there is room for concern. Despite the improved, for example, debt to GDP ratio at the end of the year, despite even though the finance minister originally announced that it was something in the region of 70%, their own figures as produced to support the budget statement at the beginning of the year, as you said, showing that it was just hovering under the 62% mark, down from 82%. This is still, even though it's in the right direction of travel, leaving much to be desired, particularly because of the lack of fiscal space for Ghana at the moment on the international capital markets. Very little being said in the statement, the counter-statement by the former Minister for Finance about what measure of success one can attribute to the Akufo-Addo governments on the level of really dialing up revenue generation, which surely must be the point of trying to get some proper foundation for an economic recovery program.
Well, revenues are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end. You mobilize those revenues to be able to deliver on an agenda, mostly a growth and jobs agenda in any economy. You'll notice that this government, again, in its populism quest, has sought to remove revenue measures without cutting expenses. And let me explain. We ourselves, as a political group, under our leader for the 2024 elections, Dr. Bawumia, had announced that we will be removing up to 3 of the major revenue elements, the e-levy, the betting, and then the COVID. This same parcel or the same set was announced by our friends on the NDC side. What was missing was how to plug the potential hole or gap that will come up. And we said that what we're going to do is that we're going to cut expenses by about 3% of GDP at the time, which was about 30 billion Ghana cedis, so that you don't end up having a hole. That will be in consonance with the framework of the ECF that we've agreed on with the IMF. Now, on the other hand, our friends on the NDC side capitalized on it politically, bastardized it heavily, haven't come to power, have not even succeeded in removing all 3 like they promised, and are now even increasing expenditures. Expenditures were about 18% of GDP. Now they are about 20% of GDP. So the hole is getting bigger instead of rather being closed. And that is why, for example, you'll find that they are reluctant now to remove the COVID levy. The COVID levy that they had made a lot of political capital off and deliberately misrepresented to the people that COVID was over, yet we were charging a COVID levy, and there was therefore no sense in charging a COVID levy when COVID was over. When they knew very well that though COVID was over, the COVID levy was to raise revenues to pay back some of the debts or to close the gap that had been occasioned because during COVID we spent without making a lot of revenues per se. So it's their own rhetoric on the economy that is beginning to catch up with them. Yes, those revenues were introduced to plug the gap at the time. We thought that it was a necessary evil. Ghanaians punished us for it. No problem, it's part of politics. They now have a responsibility to ensure that the hole doesn't grow bigger. And the way they are going, this hole is going to grow bigger.
One could say that if you have been elected on a mandate to remove unpopular taxes, and you made the point earlier that when it came to things like the tax on lottery winnings and the e-levy, the 2 main parties were in agreement in effect. So about the removal of those taxes, the COVID levy, the message from the Ghanaian people being that they saw no reason why it should continue to be charged, because regardless of the debts accumulated in the COVID era, expenditures that needed to be covered, the era of COVID being long past, it should not remain on the statute books. So the statement by Honourable Amin Adam suggests that again, although you accuse the NDC of seeking to score political points, that equally you are seeking to obviously reorient the narrative on the performance of the past Akufo-Addo governments and score political points of your own. When it comes to the question of what has been done to meet, say, targets, inflation targeting, the huge question mark about the extent to which Ghana should be focusing on inflation targeting and whether that actually is restrictive of growth. But obviously, even though we saw a marked reduction over the first 3 quarters of 2024, in that last quarter 4 of the year, we again saw it appreciating in direction that one didn't want it to travel. What would your advice be, I suppose, to the current government when it comes to handling the very tricky balancing act between restraining expenditures, which it must in order to balance the books, and at the same time dialing up revenue? The accusation of the previous NPP government was that it carried on behaving as if it could spend in the normal way when we are not living in unusual times, and in effect we have to live in conditions of some austerity before we can begin to kickstart the economy again.
Well, the evidence, first of all, disproves any argument that anyone who wants to support the NDC on this expenditure theme may put up. that the NDC is not cutting expenditure. They've increased the budget from 250 billion to 290 billion. So if anybody says the MPP was continuously spending as though there was no tomorrow, when it should have been cutting back, and therefore that's why they voted the MPP out, the evidence is that the NDC is spending more, 290 billion as against 250 billion. And so that argument, with the greatest of respect, will not be sustainable going forward. In fact, it was the MPP that had argued that you need to cut expenditure by about 3% of GDP. And if you recall our policy statement, which we put out at the UPSA, that would have been the foundation of a 2025 fiscal program that an MPP government would have put in under the leadership of Dr. Bawumia Asad now. So I think on the matter of expenditure, the evidence today shows that the NDC was not in any way committed to what they said, because while they said that expenditure should be cut and that the MPP was overspending, they have ended up rather increasing from 250 billion to 290 billion. And even more worrying is the fact that that increase is not necessarily reflecting in the productive sectors of the economy. That increase is reflecting in compensation packed up in key government offices, like the Office of Government Machinery, where the compensation budget has ballooned from 327 million Ghana cedis to 2.7 billion Ghana cedis, at a time when they had initially told everybody that they had reduced the number of ministers and ministries, and therefore there were going to be budget cuts. Today, the evidence is clear that rather the budget is going up, expenditure is going up, as against coming down. Now, the second issue is the fine balance between revenue and expenditure. And we have also argued that one of the ways to strike that balance is by creating room for the private sector to come in and take up a lot more of the expenditure through a lot of public-private partnerships or commercial endeavors, rather than the public purse pretending it can carry all of it. We believe that legitimately there's a lot of public goods and services that people are demanding and government should work towards providing. And that's why we were even providing to the tune of 290. But even to that tune of 290, we were clear and we kept arguing that it's important to bring on board the private sector to take up part of the expenditure as commercial opportunities, so that you don't end up stretching the budget some more, which stretch will then require you to increase taxes or introduce new taxes, or do some more borrowing or financing to be able to fund this expanded expenditure. And I'll give you examples. In housing, where I was, when we were doing TDC Phase 4, which we contracted out about 800 new homes. Remember, we built over 1,000 homes. We had just contracted for 800 new homes. Those 800 new homes were supposed to be pre-financed by the contractors, and then they will be bought off TDC by the clients of TDC who are going to take their mortgages to buy them. Mm-hmm. So you did not need to go back to the old method where the government needed to give budgetary allocation to the ministry and to TDC to build these 800 homes. So that is inviting private capital to come in and provide. Again, in housing, we rolled out what we called the framework for the public-private partnerships in delivering housing, where the public sector was going to make land and horizontal infrastructure, tax rebates, etc., available to the private sector, so that the private sector could come in with their capital to do large-scale projects which will be cheaper and faster for them. Another model of bringing in private capital. When we came to the 9th Parliament, it's the minority that has been urging on the government, through a statement read by myself on the floor, that government should focus more on public-private partnerships to crowd in private capital to do a lot of these projects, because you don't have the money. If you force yourself to raise the budget from 250 to 290, you will have to introduce new taxes or borrow some more. And both are happening now under this government. The government ministers rather told us that currently they don't see how to do PPPs, and that they believe that currently the only way to go is for the Treasury to fund everything. Because, again, rhetoric, the economy is so bad that they won't get private capital to come in. We totally reject and disagree with that. So what we will keep recommending to the government is to tone down on the political rhetoric and focus rather on substantive work, and in particular, reduce expenditure, be more efficient in utilizing the available resources now, in investing in productive sectors so that you can generate a lot more growth and jobs. Encourage the private sector to come in, offer incentives to the private sector to come in so that the private sector can use its resources to do more of what government is using. I'll give you two final examples. Today, the government is refusing to renew the lease of multinational mining companies, a step that sends a very bad signal, if you put it together with many of the things the government has done in the gold industry, a very bad signal to the investor community. And so the private capital, and the last time, for example, that Goldfields invested in their Damang mine, it was about $1.7 billion. Private capital that you require like this to invest in the Ghanaian economy. The government is sending a signal that your investment is not fiscally or operationally safe in Ghana. And at the same time, the government is now taxing Ghanaians or borrowing money to give about $279 million to the gold board to go buy gold. At first, that $279 million is foreign exchange earnings that will come from, people who want to import gold into their countries, Indians, Turkish, Arabians, etc. Now the government priority has shifted from allowing them to bring their money to buy gold and take it out, to using taxpayers' money to buy gold. And instead, where they were bringing their money to invest in mines, the government is introducing measures that discourage them from bringing their money into mining. So what we're saying to the government is that stop the propaganda, focus on the job, admit the economic progress, and rather introduce policies that will build on it and enhance. Look at inflation, my last point. Inflation skyrocketed to 54%, right on the back of the COVID and the Black Sea Wars. And we took a number of measures to bring it down, mostly through inflation targeting by the central bank, and then also on the supply side, trying to drive down the drivers of inflation. This government is already beginning to signal that they are worried that inflation is going to go back up or be sticky, not come down like was programmed to come down. Remember that already the disinflation path says that we should be doing about 11% inflation by the end of this year, if we were using the path or the direction that the MPP was traveling on. And from all indication, there are worries that we may not be able to even sustain that 11% inflation average for this year. In fact, properly speaking, this government should be going down, I dare say, somewhere to about 7%. Because if you look at the disinflation path on the MPP program, which was bringing us to 11%, and their argument that they were going to do better, they should be doing 9, 8, or 7%. We did about 7.9% in the early years before COVID hit us. And they can do it if they focus on the interventions on the supply side. It is because they are not focusing on interventions on the supply side and putting money and efficiency behind those interventions that the central bank has to use its inflation targeting module and hike up the rates, which comes to punish all of us. So they have opportunity to do the right thing.
Honourable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, leaving aside the question of whether inflation targeting again should be one of the prime focuses of economic reform, and leaving aside the question of whether in the particular case of the one gold mining company that you're talking about, whether it had already started in effect dialing down its operations before the announcement of the withdrawal of its license to mine on one particular site, not its main site. Just briefly to return to the question of what has been left, the legacy of the Akufo-Addo governments. One particular area, you talk about the need for private sector involvement. One area where the government is quite keen to get private sector participation is, of course, in relation to utilities, particularly as a means of addressing the peculiar problems of Electricity Company of Ghana. The Minister of Energy having announced that the energy sector legacy debt is in the region of $3 billion as of the beginning of this year, January, and the government signally having failed really to involve private sector participation in such a way as to address any of the core structural problems of ECG. The government has been calling for private sector involvement, if not outright privatization of Electricity Company of Ghana, and there has, of course, been pushback by the unions, the Public Utility Workers Union notably. What is the minority's stance on the business of beginning to tackle the energy sector legacy debt? Not a creation of the Akufo-Addo governments, but the NDC government's argument is that the past NPP government did nothing to resolve the problem.
Well, that is not correct. We inherited a debt of about 2.4 billion on the energy sector side. We introduced a number of measures that ensured, so this was a debt of 2.4 billion at a time when power was not stable. We introduced a number of measures that cost us about 6 billion to keep the lights on in 8 years. And at the time that we were leaving power, we had a debt of about 2.4 billion. 2.4 billion, mostly occasioned by the redundant capacity charges that the NDC themselves had signed up to. Now, we also believe that a lot more efficiency. So, I mean, my point on that is that the NDC cannot sustain the argument that we did not manage the energy sector well. You walk on the streets and anybody on the street will tell you that if it comes to managing the energy sector well, the NPP has done way better. In fact, this morning I was reading tweets from the Volta region and people complaining about Dumso in the Volta region. You've heard Dumso being complained about in the Ashanti region, etc. So on the assumption of office of the NDC, already people are beginning to complain about their inability to properly manage the energy sector. But put that aside, we also believe that a lot more efficiency should be injected into the performance of the energy sector and the Electricity Company of Ghana. So you'll recall the balkanization of the sector from, I think, the late 90s, which we ramped up when we came to power under the Akufo administration, to balkanize and split between regulators, aggregators, independent power producers, state power producers, and then distributors at the bottom. And we believe that private sector participation will bring efficiency. We tried it with PDS. We had challenges, and so we had to walk back that particular process. This government started off by purporting to privatize, essentially meaning they will sell. That has met a lot of resistance, and now they are talking about private sector participation. And I think why the unions are complaining is that they are not too sure about the level of transparency and openness that this government will be bringing to bear because of how they started some of these conversations. So we will not be against private sector participation, no. We'll be interested in seeing the model for private sector participation that they bring in, because it would be unconscionable on our part, having tried private sector participation before, to come back and say we don't support private sector participation. That would be duplicitous. So we will be interested in seeing the model for private sector participation they want to bring, and the transparency and the gains that will come with it. And then we can take a definite position on whether or not we support a particular transaction that they'll put on the table. But I think as a political group, we have already demonstrated that we think private sector participation can bring efficiency in the energy sector.
And as a stopgap measure, you will then not object to the 14.75% price rise in electricity tariffs as a way of plugging some of the fiscal slippages?
It's very interesting you ask that question, because when you read the IMF statement goes on to make the point that they are happy that the government has introduced the 14% tariff hike, and that they think that it is important to avoid what they call further fiscal slippages moving on. That is indication that part of what they are countering as our fiscal slippages, part of the, may I say, the assessment where they mark us down was that we didn't increase electricity bills enough. And so they are happy that this government has increased it by 14% because they believe that it will avoid fiscal slippages. We disagree with the IMF on that one. And when we're in power, we disagreed with them. We'll continue to disagree with them. As a government, you have to ask yourself a question: how much of these electricity bills can be passed on to the consumer at the end? If you sign a contract on the back end, that is a capacity charge, which capacity charge has not been consumed by the consumer at home, it will be unconscionable for you to pass on the bill to the consumer at home. The PURC will not allow you to pass it on to the consumer at home. The PURC will say, well, it is you, the government, that signed a capacity charge for a take or pay clause with this producer. And so if that power has not been produced, you, the government, have to bear that. And the government can find ways by which it can ring fence and find other ways of paying for it, not necessarily through the budget. But what this government has elected to do is to pass it on to the consumer, 14% increase. Today I was listening to feedback from some consumers who say that, so if you took away 1% here and 10% on people who have earned from bettings, not everybody participates in it, only to slap 14% on what everybody consumes, even for what they have not consumed. Are people better off or are people worse off? So it is a choice that the government has made, and they will live or die by that sort.
Honourable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, thank you very much for those views there on the staff-level agreement reached between the International Monetary Fund and the Government of Ghana after fourth review of the Extended Credit Facility. Thank you very much for joining us on the Asaase Breakfast Show.